What's up, good people? Waiting for Mr. Rodney Barnes to hop into the room. And here he is. Kiki Hall, what's up? I saw you come in the other live. How you doing, love?
What's going on?
There he is. How are you?
Hanging in there. How are you?
I'm doing well. For those that don't know, this is Mr. Rodney Barnes. Mr. Rodney Barnes is an award-winning writer, producer, uh, story creator. He's a graphic novelist. He's an author. He's everything. He's such the bombdilla.
Thank you very much.
So you're welcome. Mr. Barnes, I highly revere you. That's why you're on my show. And I just want to talk to you about your career and your artistry for a little
Cool.
bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sounds good. Look forward to it.
So, I guess starting off in your early days of being in Maryland, being a young man, you were creating stories then, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't as structured and focused as I would love to. I would love to lie and say I've been, all my life, I knew I was going to be a writer and, I've been writing stories since birth. But that's not true. I had teachers tell me along the way that, I had some aptitude when it came to English and creativity and all of those things. But, um, for me, I was more focused on trying to play ball and be popular and all of the things that I failed at ultimately in life. But I did have an interest, though. I mean, I collected comic books as a kid. I loved movies. I loved the arts. I loved all of that stuff. I just never psychologically and emotionally made a connection between loving it and doing it for a living.
Mm.
From Maryland, I didn't see a bridge to one day being a writer and talking to you about writing. I didn't see that. I figured I would just get a regular 9 to 5 and that was it.
So, the stories that you created when you were that age, were they basically based off of the format of a comic book style since that was your
Yeah.
literature of
I
preference?
mean,
Yeah?
I copied off of the stuff that I knew. I tried to be Stephen
Hmm.
King, or I tried to be Alan Moore, or I tried to be whoever I was a fan of at the time. I didn't really have a voice. I just wanted to be like the people that, sort of I admired and looked up to.
What was one of your favorite stories from back then? One that really grabbed you?
Uh, well, Stephen King wise, probably the early books, The Shining, Salem's Lot,
Hmm.
The Stand, Carrie, Pet Cemetery, those books. And then in comics, Saga, The Swamp Thing, Alan Moore was still my favorite
Hmm.
book to this day. But Frank Miller's Daredevil, Dark Knight Returns, the classic stuff sort of
Yeah.
was what drove me and made me want to like fall in love with it and sort of nudge me towards wanting to make things, but I never saw myself as ever being good enough to get there and make that kind of stuff.
And then what was the point that well, what type of writings were you doing at the point when you realized that you really had something?
I still haven't realized it. I mean, I'm
Oh,
still kind
Mr.
of,
Barnes, Mr.
yeah,
Barnes.
I'm still, I mean, to be completely honest, I mean, I still haven't scratched the surface of the things that I want to do. I think I got to a certain point where I was just going to do it, and however it turned out or whatever it became, that's for the audience to judge whether or not what it is. I think for
Hmm.
me, I'm just kind of doing it and trying to do the best that I can to make the best stuff that I possibly can. But I still haven't gotten to a point where like, yeah, I made it. I'm still not there.
No, I get that. I feel that. What type of stories did you gravitate toward? You like the horror, mystery?
Always horror, mystery. I mean, even superhero stuff, but things that had meaning. Anything that moves me. I'm a sensitive soul. So anything that sort of has heart, um, and that would be odd for people to think, how does horror have heart? But if you read a lot of horror novels, the best stuff, they typically have in the life of the protagonist, and sometimes in the antagonist, sad stories, tragic stories, but still heartfelt stories. And I always gravitated to that kind of stuff and just things that had meaning. And horror, I think, there's always or typically a life and death component there. So it was always sticks. It was always
Yeah.
like something for real. It's hard to, I don't like comedy and horror mixed. I like when it's humor in a scene, but I never want to come out of the scene for it to be silly. Um, and so if they take it seriously, movies like The Exorcist, things like that sort of grabbed me too at an early age,
Hmm.
and Alien, just stuff like that that always felt important for some reason, certainly to the mind of a kid. But yeah,
Yeah. I give a lot of kudos to my parents for allowing me unfiltered access to art like that. They never filtered me as far as what they would allow me to absorb. It would just be if I had questions on something, then we could talk about it. But for the most part, they let me absorb things, and that's how I became a lover of film and literature the way that
I
I am.
just never had parental supervision, so I
Really?
just kind of just went. I've been like 6'1" since I was 13, 14 years old, so I just walked in movie theaters, and I don't think they cared. Back then it wasn't
Well,
like the movies now, where
yeah.
it's at the mall and a superplex or whatever. I just went to the movies, and after a while, R-rated didn't mean anything. This is before PG-13. I just sort of walked in and went to the movies.
What was the first film that really like grabbed you by your spirit?
Um, it's hard to say because I love movies so much. When I was a kid, my mother used to take me to the movies all the time. That was kind of our thing. So the early Planet of the Apes films, we had this one theater that always showed like blaxploitation films,
Hmm.
um, and they would have like revivals. So things that probably were made before I was born, I got an opportunity to see.
Yeah.
And I just saw so many movies that I don't think there was one. I certainly know The Exorcist had a profound effect on me. It did turn my world upside down because it was shot so well. It was so revolutionary in the way that, um, and I read the book too. So it
Hmm.
was one of the first books other than Jaws. I was that kid too. I read a lot too.
Yeah.
So it was like being able to read the book and already having a relationship with the material and then going to the movies and seeing, it up on screen had a profound effect as well. But it's too many movies. I mean, I remember my father took me to see Bambi and I was terrified. And that was like 4 or 5 years old. So
Yeah.
I can think of at least 20 different seminal moments watching movies where I was moved.
I just want to pick your brain a little bit because you brought up two films that are near and dear to me, and that's Jaws and The Exorcist.
Mhm.
Jaws being the first film that I ever saw in my life, and just The Exorcist having the big, profound thing on me that I believe is like one of the greatest horror movies ever made.
Right.
Um, reading both the book and seeing the film, how do you feel about it as a person that works in both worlds? How do you feel about the adaptation from book to film about
Uh,
Jaws?
I thought it was about Jaws.
Yeah.
Jaws was different. Peter Benchley's book was way different than the
Yes.
movie. It just had a shark, but a lot of the other character development that Spielberg brought to it was, or I forget the screenwriter's name, but that was different. But The Exorcist, with William Peter Blatty, at the heart of it, and Freak and directing it, they were very, very similar. And so that was more. I think the thing with Jaws was it was one of the first big summer movie blockbuster type
Hmm.
films that
Yeah.
had a an importance to it. And I think Star Wars came shortly around that period of time, so you had all of these big summer movies for the first
Hmm.
time. But up until then, it was just like going to the movies. You just saw a movie you wanted to see and you went to the movies. But all of a sudden, it became something like an event.
Yes.
And so the book was a bestseller as well, but it just was much longer, much denser, much different.
Hmm.
Whereas Jaws was a popcorn movie. but
Yeah.
a well done popcorn movie, one of the best movies. And John Milius, one of my favorite writers,
Yeah.
that wrote the speech, Quint, when he was in the boat, the USS Indianapolis speech. Um, all of that stuff just had I've been fortunate in my life to have moments in pop culture that it hit me right at the right time as I was developing. Like,
Hmm.
comics, when I was a kid, I would read Neil Adams covers were the thing that grabbed me when I was a kid. Like
Hmm.
just seeing his artwork. There was something about his artwork with Batman and Green Lantern and some of his Marvel work that just sort of I had to have it. But then when I started reading them, that was when Frank Miller and Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and all of these guys started to do, like, they were writing literature, like they were writing dense prose in some cases. And that grabbed me right at the formative years. And it seems like movies were the same thing, that I came along in this period where you had the 70s, where film was becoming more bold and audacious, where it was in your face. And I remember the American international films like Capricorn One and some of the others that were spoke to Soylent Green, and just these movies that were talking about politics and
Hmm.
sort of reflecting what was happening in society with Vietnam and the civil rights movement and all of
Hmm.
this, that it sort of made those things, it reinforced those things for me. So that all sort of invaded my mind subconsciously. So when I'm working, I still kind of have that same vibe in a lot of my personal, certainly in the comic books with stuff like Philadelphia and other things, where I'm looking to make it impactful, be important,
Right.
be more than just blood and guts and gore.
Right. So, what was your first job where you actually earned a pay?
Uh, for what? You mean in the
Writing.
business of
Yeah.
writing?
Yeah.
I think, well, I had a bunch of, there was this period I would go through where when I came to Hollywood, because I was a production assistant first, and people knew I wanted to be a writer, but would give me opportunities. And I would write basketball players, rappers, comedians, like people would pay me sometimes to write jokes and to write different things. There was no structure to it, but
Hmm.
I was sort of at boot camp. If you're asking what was the first WGA Guild job, that was on My Wife and Kids, where I was a punch up writer at first, and then that evolved into being a staff writer, and my career sort of took off from there.
So, I guess what I really want to pinpoint is that window between when you were writing jokes and plays for people to the point where you actually got the gig working on My Wife and Kids. What transpired in between to make that connection?
I started to take it more and more seriously. I mean, I think I came to LA in '95. I lived in my car. I was more concerned about survival and wanted to go back to Maryland a bunch of times because I still thought, even though I was here, it was a fantasy. But I knew there was nothing for me back home. I knew what life would be if I went back home, and I didn't know what life would be if I hung in there. So I hung in there. That was the biggest push and motivator to stay. And circumstances. I worked on a movie, The Green Mile. I was Michael Clark Duncan's stand-in, even though we don't look anything alike. But fortunately, no one noticed. And I wanted to meet Stephen King. That was a huge thing, and it's a story behind that. But I sort of got a glimpse into, it was even though it was a big movie, it was an intimate movie, and everybody who
Mhm.
was involved sort of was in love with the same stuff I was in love with. Director Frank Darabont um, was a big fan of pop culture and sci-fi and all of that stuff, and every morning we would talk um, about that stuff. Have you seen this movie? Did you see this movie? And we would talk almost like we're talking right now. And Bernie Wrightson, the late great artist Bernie Wrightson, did the some of the character design on the movie, and I had worked on Forrest Gump before, so I knew Tom Hanks a little bit. And then Stephen King came, and I followed him around like a puppy, and he signed my books and all of this stuff. And so Um,
Can I
yeah,
pause you right there though?
of
What is
course.
that like meeting someone that you revered so much and you absorbed so much of his art, meeting him for the first time? What was that like?
Uh, it was great. I mean, the great thing about it is he lived up to my fantasy. They say never meet your heroes.
Hmm.
But I met my hero, and he was everything that I needed him to be at the time. When you're raw and you're green and you're looking for, there are two types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation, there's extrinsic motivation. And intrinsically, I needed to know that it was real. And somehow being so close to someone physically in proximity, and I'm holding his books as he's signing them for me, and he's kind to me and he's talking to me. And it's weird how just through osmosis, um, it's like, okay, this is a real person. This isn't like a computer writing these books and making these things. This is a person who is talking just like we're talking right now.
Hmm.
And, it moved me. It was incredibly moving. And then, and then to be able to attach that to the larger work, um, it just sort of created this thing in me that it was possible. Now, whether or not it was
Right.
possible to me, I mean, I knew that there were things that I had to do, that there was a big bridge I had to build between where I was and where ultimately I wanted to be. Um, but it sort of made it real for me. It took away just the idea of survival and sort of being a big fanboy.
Right. Part of the reason that I have these conversations, Mr. Barnes, is because I'd like to believe that I'm in the business of helping people on the path to finding their
Mhm.
passion, right? So I talk to people who have become successful, who made a really big impact in the world and influence other people to some degree. And some people look at you as a beacon of light. And I just want to show them
Right,
that the path isn't always what they think it is, and that if they hear some of their heroes speak and hear some of their true stories, that they can see that it's obtainable for themselves. So
right.
that's why we have these
Yeah,
conversations.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I get it.
uh, and so you're now in Hollywood and you're writing for My Wife and Kids. Um, do you, well, you said earlier that you haven't felt that feeling yet, but to some degree, did you feel like you've arrived, that you made it at some point? You're not in the car anymore, I suspect, at this point.
No, I'm not in the car. I mean, I'm not that far being out of the car. I mean, I did a bunch of things to survive. I mean, uh, hold on one second, please.
Sure.
Um, I've got to,
I saw Miss Merrill Dandridge come into the room at some point. Hi, Miss Merrill Dandridge. I absolutely like love you, love your art. Thank you for joining. Thanks everybody for being in the room. How you guys enjoying the conversation thus far?
I'm back. Lord willing, he will listen and do what I'm asking him to do. So there you go. Lord willing, he'll leave the food on the front door, or he'll throw it at the front door, one or the other. But
Oh
yes,
wow.
continue.
All right. So I asked you at that point, do you feel like you've
No,
arrived? You said you were fresh out of,
yeah,
no?
no, there's no arrival. I think for me, I mean, maybe some people arrive. I think this is the nature, the fickle nature of what this business is. Like I remember when my grandmother said that, when my grandmother said, "Get a real job," as like she sort of saw this as the circus, like you go from place to place to place. That's not stability. Um, and she's kind of right. So it's really hard unless you get a huge hit. And I've been on some solid shows, and shows that made it to syndication and shows I'm very, very proud of. But I don't know if there's ever an arrival point where you get to, um, where you know, like everything's good from here on out. I don't know a writer that feels that way. There's some,
Right.
there's some that, cross that bridge where everything's cool, but I'm not there.
Okay. What had been going on with me? I review movies for another podcast that I work called the Stephen Knight Show, and I review movies for that podcast. And I absorb a lot of content.
Hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, when I gravitate towards something and the storyline is pretty complicated and it's throwing a whole bunch of things at me at one time and it has loops and twists, and I'm a sucker for
Hmm.
credits, and I look in the credits and I see Mr. Rodney Barnes.
Hmm.
That's how you became on my radar because I noticed that I gravitated toward your style, and I really am an admirer of your work.
Thank you.
And I guess part of that, the question where that derives from is, are you aware of your presence in the culture at all?
No, I mean, people like you tell me, and I appreciate that, but I don't know. I mean, I know that people come up to me and they say, I grew up on your work, which makes me
Hmm.
feel, and I appreciate it though. And I do realize that I've been a part of um, some pretty popular shows. I mean, I think the
Hmm.
Boondocks and Wife and Kids and Everybody Hates Chris, and even some of the later work like American Gods and Wu Tang and now Winning Time,
Hmm.
um, that a lot of folks have a tendency to, have gravitated to those shows. I mean, I think for me, most of the guys who I sort of looked up to and were, I hate to use the word mentor, but I use it for right now because I can't think of a better word. Whenever I asked them for advice, they always said to look forward, keep looking forward.
Hmm.
If I get back and I sit back and I just reflect so much and say, oh man, I'm the man, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if I'll keep getting better. And I
Hmm.
don't know if I'll keep focusing on the work. And the work is the relationship that you and I have. It's not necessarily, you know, my, however, whatever the perception of me is, positively, that's great. But I hope to continue to make things that continue to move the needle. And hopefully, when I'm gone, things will be better for the next generation that comes in and, is attempting to continuously move the needle. Because I think, certainly from a cultural perspective,
Hmm.
a lot of work that still needs to be done. But I stand in the line of folks who did this before me,
Right.
and had there not been those guys and those things that moved me from the blaxploitation movement, before folks like Oscar Micheaux and whoever else, Gordon Parks and a bunch of
Hmm.
other people, the Melvin Van Peebles and
Yes.
um, so many people before me that broke barriers and did things. It's like, fortunately, I'm in a position where I can write the kind of stuff that I'm writing, and studios and networks will listen. Um,
Yes.
that's all you can really hope for, and that I've been able to do this for 25, 30 years, and hopefully we'll continue to do it for some more time to come. Um, so yeah, I'm just thankful and grateful and just hoping to continuously bring the best out of myself and keep moving forward.
Absolutely. You brought up black exploitation films, and which brings me to your latest work, Blackula.
Hmm.
And so, one thing about me, my family, part of my family were Pan Africanists in the 70s. And if anyone knows about the Pan Africanist movement, knows that it's a strong, heavy influence on African American education and our ancestry, and trying to basically live a life with a certain amount of pride. I'll put it that way. And there was this character in this black exploitation film called Blackula, who I absolutely fell in love with because he wasn't your average, uh, I guess, Dracula or villain. He had a purpose. He had heart. He had integrity, and it was a black man. It was probably one of the strongest first images of a black man that I saw on television.
Hmm.
Was a vampire, and it moved me.
Hmm.
And so, Mr. Rodney Barnes has told another chapter to this story, and it's given me new hope for the Blackula story to continue. You want to jump in, Mr. Barnes?
Yeah, I mean, I saw Blackula as one of the first movies I'd ever seen that had a black character driving a narrative horror film
Hmm.
when I was a kid. And I was a big horror fan for a long time. I loved the Universal movies with Dracula, Frankenstein, Werewolf, and the Hammer films with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee.
Hmm.
Loved those films. Never saw black people. Maybe a cab driver, maybe somebody walking on the street, but never anybody at the heart of the narrative. So
Right.
when I saw Blackula and the late great William Marshall, directed by the great William Crane, um, it just sort of had a profound effect on me. And I love the opening and the idea of the opening where, Prince Mamuwalde goes to Count Dracula for help with the slave trade. Thought that was fantastic. And very quickly, Dracula, spoiler alert, Dracula turns on him and curses him and calls him Blackula. And then sort of it becomes the plot device. And, it was to get him to the black community and to get him starting his vampire thing and all of that. But there was something that I felt more so than what I saw, and I think it played a part in what you said about your family being Pan-Africanist.
Hmm.
Throughout the blaxploitation movement, whether it was Shaft, Superfly, any of those movies, there's a subversive element running through them that I think was connected to the Panthers, and all of the subset, the groups that offshoot groups, and just that revolutionary feeling that was under all of those movies. And that was in Blackula as well, But I felt like as I got older, I saw some of the problematic things that were
Hmm.
there as well. And so I said, if I ever had the opportunity, I kind of said this as a kid too, if I ever had the opportunity to do this differently, um, I would extricate some of the things that were problematic and I would highlight some of the things that I thought were beautiful about the movie.
Hmm.
And language was huge. William Marshall
Hmm.
was a Shakespearean trained actor. He was Othello. He was, he took the role as seriously as Bela Lugosi took Dracula. And
Right.
I wanted the language in the book to feel similar to the language in those other movies. I wanted it to
Hmm.
feel like William Marshall would appreciate this journey and he would appreciate these words were he able to, read them and see them. And so it was sort of an homage to him. It was sort of an homage to the era and hopefully trying to create a bridge through this literary project, a bridge between those movies and today.
Hmm.
And to create some semblance of depth in character and all of those things. I wanted to kind of capture that energy. And, it was a lot of fun. I think Jason Sean Alexander, who illustrates the book, does a great job in capturing the feeling and the tone that I was
Hmm.
going for, like that horror feeling of dread, but still in the moments where you're looking for some funny, you get some humor, you get some
Right.
heart, you get some, mystery. And I think you did a fantastic job with that. And hopefully we'll be able to do some other volumes if I'm able to do a couple of more. I got a couple more stories in mind. But it was just an honor to be able to revisit something from my childhood. And, a lot of the stuff, yeah, I published that book through my company, Zombie Love Studios. And
Hmm.
that came from a lot of what I look to do with the company is really recreate a lot of things from my childhood. And there's not, when you get into film and TV, a lot of times you have a lot of people, a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You rarely do you get to just write whatever you want to write. And
Right.
with the comic book business, I've been able to write closer to what I'd really like to write.
Hmm.
It's closer. I don't really have anybody in my ear saying, I did. I mean, sometimes when I'm writing for Marvel and DC, certainly the Star Wars books, Mandalorian, I have to stay within the boundaries of who those characters are. But when I'm writing my own stuff, I can just write. And so it's an exercise of idealism in a way where I can just wake up in the morning, come into my office and write whatever I want to write. And my day work and my night work, because I do write movies at night, and TV by day, and comic books by early morning. Um, I can write whatever I want to, and it puts me in a good headspace and a good mood.
So when you write for a company like Marvel or DC, like how does that work? Do they give you a synopsis, or that they automatically assume that you pretty much know the nature of a character because you're such a fan? Like how does that work?
Wish it should work that way. No, typically I get an email from an editor saying, "Hey, we like your work. Would you like to write this character or this thing?" And I say yes or no, and then I have to come up with a pitch for whatever it is that I'm going to do.
Mhm.
Like I got a Batman book I'm about to do, hopefully, and I had to come up with the story and write this thing and send in the pitch, and then they'll say we like this, we don't like that, we like this, we don't like that, and then I have to make some modifications. And sometimes when I'm lucky, I can make the modifications in the script. I don't have to redo an outline, but you always have to write something. There has to be something that you write to get you the gig.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure like how thick are the contracts that you have to sign in order to do that because they're so under secrecy about their projects.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that, but understandably so. I mean, these characters,
Yeah.
certainly with the movies, they've taken on a life of their own, and they're important now. Whereas
Hmm.
when I was a kid, I don't think anybody. I was talking to Patton Oswalt, the writer, comedian, actor, and
Yes.
we were saying how comic books used to be like disposable entertainment. It was
Yeah.
like an extension of a newspaper. That's why they
Yeah.
were 20 cents, 25 cents.
Yeah.
Nobody ever thought that they would become what they've become. And now they're $4 a piece, and they're sort of advertisements for movies
Yeah.
or even IP. I don't think anybody was thinking IP when I was a kid watching or reading these books. I even know you
Right.
could have Batman and all of that, but it didn't seem to have the same monetary, you know, attachment to it before. It was more or
Right.
less for fun, even the Adam West Batman and all of those. But um, now they're a big deal.
Do you have still any in your collection?
Do I still have any?
Comic
What?
books.
Yeah,
Comic
I've got
books.
over 100,000 comic books. I've got
Oh wow. Good for
I still
you.
have a huge collection that I got to get cataloged at some point to leave to somebody when I die.
Any number ones?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
damn near all the Silver Ages, and I've got a pretty extensive, pretty impressive. It's a
Very
stupid.
nice.
I've spent too much money on these things.
It's a gift that's going to give back to you at some point.
We shall see. Well, to somebody, but we shall see.
So this new viral sensation of Blackula, how are you feeling about that?
Oh, it's always a good feeling for something that you don't know if it's going to work, uh,
Hmm.
to get it to work, and that people seem to appreciate it. And now the idea is to build off of it. Like, how do we take it
Yeah.
from where it is to where ultimately I'd like it to go? And, so other books. It's a book, Florence and Normandy, that I did with actor Exhibit. And that'll be out in August, and a bunch of other books that are coming afterwards. So a lot of big things coming from the company, and most of this was funded out of all of it was funded from my pocket. I paid
Hmm.
all to be put together, and it was way more expensive than I ever thought it would be. But I'm happy with the finished product, and hope to continue to be able to continue.
When did you create Zombie Love?
2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, because it took us 2 years to do that book, because we were still doing Philadelphia and Nita Hawes' Nightmare Blog
Hmm.
and Monarch and Mandalorian and a bunch of other books. And I still have a day job and a bunch of other things to do, and written a few movies in between. So, it's been about 2.5 years, I think.
Okay. All right. Mr. Rodney Barnes, I'm not going to keep you any longer. Hold on one
Uh-oh.
second. No, no, no. I just want to show the people
Yes.
uh Blackula. Go out, pick it up. It's an awesome read. The artwork is tremendous. Jason Shaw Alexander, you did your thing, brother. I wouldn't mind talking to
Yeah,
him either. You
yeah,
guys
he
did
can
an
draw
awesome
black people.
job.
He can draw black people. I give him that.
Very well. Very
Yes,
well.
yes.
Mr. Rodney Barnes, tell everybody where they can find you and keep up with you.
Yeah, you can find me at the Rodney Barnes on Instagram and Twitter. My website, rodneybarnes.com, zombielovestudios.com. Those are the best places to reach out and find me.
I appreciate you for your time and your energy because you didn't have to, and I appreciate you for coming here.
I appreciate your support, and hopefully I will continue to earn your support, and hopefully you'll like the stuff to come, and we can talk again.
Absolutely. I'm praying on MGM looking at Blackula to be something big on the screen, one day.
There is a Blackula movie in development, and with my good friend Dion Taylor, and we have different ideas as to what we want to do, but I'm very supportive of what Dion wants to do, and you never know how this business goes. There's enough room and space for a character. How many Draculas have you had? How many iterations of Dracula or vampires have you had?
Right. Exactly.
There's space for both of us, and I think sometimes when you get creators of color in the same genre space, they want to pit us against each other to
Right.
fight. Which one is this, that? But that never happens. You could have Wes Craven and John Carpenter, George Romero, and all these guys occupying the same space. I think we all can occupy the same space as well and be supportive of one another. So um, look out for his and look out for mine.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr.
All
Rodney
right.
Barnes. I appreciate it. All
Likewise,
right.
brother. You take it easy.
Take care.
All right.
All right.
Yep.